drug testing program that NASCAR instituted was still relatively new, right? Like, was it a year? Were we a year or 2 years? Not even a year into it? Did they hand you guys a list of banned substances? No. There was none of that. No. So, like, you guys kind of went in doing random drug tests, but not knowing anything else. Is that right?
Right. So, they said if you're taking anything over the counter the way it's supposed to be taken, you'll be fine. To be clear, like in my position, it was so vague, you were scared to do anything. You were scared to take any cold medication or any. You weren't, because you didn't know, you didn't have a clear list, and you didn't know when you were going to get asked to test, because it was a random thing. Mm-hmm. They just call you in. You'll go up in this trailer, one at a time. You'll go up in this bathroom. Guy hands you a cup. He's got all the materials and paperwork and everything there, and you go in the bathroom, pee, hand it to him. You're just like so nervous because I never saw a list. They eventually, I think, did have a list that you could get, but I was just like, I just won't do anything because I don't want to look at this list. Right. To the hell with that, right? It's like work. Anyways, it was pretty scary at the time, and I remember, I don't know when this was in the timeline of events, but I think this was after your suspension. NASCAR brought all the drivers together and talking about the drug policy. And I remember he drove the Claritin-D car. Carl Edwards. He raises his hand. Carl's like, what about these over-the-counter drugs that are on our race cars, right? What about these, And they really weren't clear on what to tell you about that.
Right.
And I think at that time, we all were like skeptical about like what you were going through, whether NASCAR, whether this testing policy was legit, was genuine, were they possibly picking up, Claritin-D and Adderall and things like that, and not sure whether they were illegal drugs or was it this prescription, right? We weren't sure. Right. None of us felt safe. None of us felt sure that this, you couldn't trust it, right? Because it was kind of all so new. And NASCAR didn't have a problem. There were other sports that were having problems, and NASCAR was reacting to that, saying, you know what, we'll have a drug policy. Because the media, so there was some other issues going on in other sports, and the media was like, well, what about NASCAR? Are there problems? How do you know? How do you know there's not any problems? You don't have a policy. Well, we'll have a policy.
Right.
And so they're like, boom, here's our policy. We got this new policy. And all the drivers were like, all right, well none of us taking drugs, right? So, no problem. And but it was also kind of vague as they were rolling it out.
Yep.
And none of us really knew exactly the truth, because they wouldn't say they wouldn't come out and say, well, it was this drug. This is the drug that was in his system. But it was kind of similar to how they do the illegal, when a car is illegal, and it might be fuel or it might be a part or something, then they won't say. And so it gets people speculating, right? And that is exactly what was happening in Jeremy's case.
Yep. I mean, that's perfect right there. That's exactly the way I was seeing it too also, and then so I'm thinking to myself, okay, I didn't do anything. I took Adderall. I told him that day one, took Adderall and take Claritin-D. So when it came out positive like that, and he hadn't even tested my sample yet, and he already had a decision made before he had that, I could tell, the way he was acting, that this was going to be bad,
Yeah.
And so when we actually sit down the first time, Dr. Black, and this will really get you, he's telling us, we sit down with him about 2 hours, him and O'Donnell and those guys, and he's telling us how, his test, he can't have any false positives because he's got all this new equipment and he's got all this lab stuff, this, that, and the other. So he sits there and talks for 2 hours and explains all this stuff. When he gets done, my attorney asked him one question, and he said, what is the name of the chemical that you put in the sample that takes out the pseudoephedrine or anything that Claritin-D's got in it, as far as amphetamines and all this, that, and the other? But there's supposedly some kind of, chemical you put in there that separates that from an illegal drug. And this is what Dr. Black said, just like this. He got quiet, and he goes, let me see. I know what you're talking about, but anyway.
Yeah.
And we never got that answer. So that's what we're up against, So I'm thinking the whole time, listen to this guy. He come in and personally tested mine when he just told us that he's got lab technicians all over the world that are perfect. But he came back to work, from being retired as a lab technician and tested mine.
Yeah.
So none of that made sense to us. And then when we got ready to get up out of the meeting, I didn't want to go through a lawsuit. I didn't want to fight NASCAR, by no means, and I knew what was going to happen if I did,
Mm-hmm.
But after hearing all that, I'm like, I had no choice, It was either basically, go off wherever I had to go off to, for no reason. I'm going to be sitting there in a rehab somewhere looking around, everybody there, and just didn't feel like I needed to do that,
That's what I want to ask you, actually. Because you did have a choice. You had a choice. You're saying you didn't have a choice, but they said that there was a choice. I was always curious if there was a clear-cut pathway back to racing. And regardless of whether or not you wanted to do it or was ever considering doing it, was there ever a clear-cut pathway to say, hey, listen, you do this, it may take 6 months, maybe a couple weeks, I don't know, but you will be back in your car?
Yeah, no, I never got that. Here's what I got from Dr. Black. I said, how long and how quick can I get back from racing, basically? This was like day 1, 2, right after it happened. And this is Darlington the next week when they finally announced it. And he said, well, Jeremy, he said, it's like this. And this was a lot of the problem was him, And he said, depending on how you respond to the press conference that we're fixing to have, which I'm sitting at home, didn't know they was having a press conference about it.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I had no idea. And he said, depending on how you respond, I said, so basically you're telling me if the way I respond to after the press, the press conference y'all are fixing to have to the media, that's going to be how long it's going to take me to get back. And he said, well, yeah, basically that's it.
So as far as he thought, all right, if he has a negative response to this,
right,
the media's going to come to you after this press conference and say, hey, Jeremy, what's your thoughts? And he said, whatever your response is to that,
yes,
this is how we'll handle it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So nothing was going good for me at all about it. I'm sitting there going, okay, all this is happening, and then now it's basically how I respond to the press conference is how long it's going to take me to get through this,
Yeah.
So anyway, we started looking at, because that the problem started with Dr. Black, for one, being owns the lab, doing my testing for some reason, mine only, and had my name on it, which is supposed to be just numbers. And then
that's right.
Going down the line. So there's a lot of things that were wrong with it. So when all this started out, we started doing a lot of research. We had a lot of experts that were calling us, saying this, that, and the other. But Dr. Black told me also that he did not. There's no way his company can have a false positive on my test or anybody's test. So that was wrong too. No false positives, which we all know that they can. And then he was doing the WWE at the time. I think one of the wrestling deals, whatever. He was their administrator for the drug test, and he had to go to Congress at the same time we were doing this because of Chris Benoit. You remember the wrestler that kind of had roid rage, whatever he had, and basically Dr. Black was doing their testing and showed on his list nothing, never, no steroids, and then the guy goes off and then they find steroids all in the system. So, I mean, when all this started happening, we just started looking into it, and it just looked like, some reason, that you got a guy over here just had roid rage, and you're telling the world that he's never tested positive for anything. Then you got a guy over here that's just trying to race, and now I'm positive for Adderall, and which eventually turned into methamphetamine. Yeah. And so just everything was just leading into that. Just something wasn't right.
NASCAR ends up getting all this thrown out because you signed the hard card agreement. When you sign the hard card agreement, every driver, every crew member, everybody signs this agreement. It basically takes away a lot of your ability and rights to defend yourself in a case like this or whatever, right? So you've waived all of your rights. So that's what the judges all eventually decided, am I right?
Right, exactly.
And so you basically just had to walk away?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And it was the drug testing part of it. We won. The first time we went to court, we won that battle. We won really all of them as far as the drug testing went, but then eventually got to where they, after so long, I forgot what the time frame was, but it came down to where I just signed my agreement saying I couldn't sue NASCAR for any reason whatsoever.
When you say win, what specifically did you win? What was the case? Or what was being determined in the court?
Right, that there could have been a false positive. That they should have given me an opportunity to at least tell me not to do it. Basically,
So you're saying that the court decided that there could be a false positive. You're saying that's that's
for
how.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And the judge awarded us my license back.
Really?
Oh yeah, and you know what that's going to happen after that. And I'll never forget that because Brian France was in the courtroom that day, and he was pissed. After the judge saying, okay, you can, basically go back racing again if you want to. It's up to you. And you know how that goes. When they suspended me and the judge, basically takes the suspension away, that it pissed him off pretty good, you know.
Was it, so did you come back racing? I don't remember this. So your suspension was lifted. It was overturned.
Right.
And then did you return?
Well, I was going to. And then
what happened?
Then they show up at my house like that was like on a Thursday or something like that. And I wasn't going to race that weekend. That weekend was Daytona. And we weren't ready to race anyway because we didn't know what was going to happen, you know. And so then they showed up at my house on Monday at 7 o'clock at night. You know, NASCAR and their new drug testing people or whatever they were, you know. And I told my attorney, I said, all they want to do is just get another sample. You know, my dog could have peed in the cup, you know, and it was going to be positive, I'm sure. You know, they own the sample, they own the lab, they own everything. So all they needed was to go back and say, look, Judge, I told you, look, it's positive again. So our thoughts were when that happened was, okay, at 7 o'clock at night, that's telling us that you don't want to, you know, you think that all the places are closed where I can go get my own test done, right? I mean, that's what you're hoping and thinking.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so we went straight to the hospital, to Fry Hospital, and my doctor had, you know, set up a drug test for Fry, and we show up there, and all this is documented too, by the way, by, you know, I'll tell you about that in a minute, but so I show up at Fry Hospital and get LabCorp to do another test on me. You know, this is like 20 minutes after they left. I went straight to the hospital.
Did you give them a sample?
Yeah.
And then you went to do your own sample?
Yeah, and went down my own just to make sure, you know.
Yeah.
And learned that from the Tim Richmond deal, too. He did the same thing, you know.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And so we go get our test done, and I couldn't wait. I was like, man, it's going to be great here. You know, it's going to be a good thing here. And that was by LabCorp, too, by the way. And so a couple weeks went by, and we didn't hear anything, you know, and I thought.
From NASCAR?
Yeah, from NASCAR. Not Dr. Black or nobody. So
what about LabCorp?
LabCorp, we got our results back, and it was zero, nothing in it. And I'll tell you another long story too. I had not got my prescription filled for my Adderall because I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna take it anymore. So you got to have a certain percentage of amphetamines in your system to make it into a methamphetamine somehow. I forgot what the percentage is. Well, we knew what they were gonna say about that. Well, they got a cutoff and we don't. So we had them tested again at a zero cutoff, and then it showed nothing in my system again. Mm-hmm. Well, so now I'm like waiting. Okay, this is going to be good. 2 or 3 weeks go by, I hadn't heard anything, and all of a sudden, boom, phone rings. It's Dr. Black, you know, and he's like, hey, Jeremy, you know, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing great, as I should be, you know. He said, hey, I just want to ask you first question. Are you still taking your Adderall? I said, no, I'm telling you the honest God's truth. I said, yeah, I'm still taking it, and I wasn't.
You lied to him.
I lied to him.
Yeah.
But I said, yeah, I'm still taking it because I knew what he was wanting. He had to know that to know the percentage of amphetamines to make it methamphetamines. So I said, no. I said, yeah, I've been taking it, still taking it. So he said, well, you tested positive again, you know, for amphetamines, whatever. And I said, well, I'm sure I was. You know, when you come, I pee in your cup, I knew that. If my dog peed in it, I know, you know, I pretty much knew what was going to happen, you know. And so, you know, anyway, so we waited, didn't hear nothing else about it. And all of a sudden another press release comes out. Mayfield, you know, tested positive again. It's like a month goes by before all this happened. I thought, it's perfect. Now we got our LabCorp stuff. Well, he tried to convince the judge that LabCorp doesn't do the type testing they do for some reason, somehow. Right. So that just kind of just evened out, you know, like a wash, I guess you'd say, as far as the judge goes. But, you know, I'm not sure after that. But anyway, after he said I tested positive again, he said we should have had our B sample, basically. We can go back up a little bit, too, on the B sample. And we said, okay, we want to send the B sample to LabCorp, you know, of our choice.
Their B sample.
Right, their B sample they had, and they wouldn't let us have it. And we still haven't got it, you know. So,
really?
I didn't get my first B sample.
Yeah.
My first test or my second.
Hey, if you like that conversation, you ought to listen to the entire podcast because it's all really good. The Dale Jr. Download is available on all major podcast platforms.